Pressing. You'll work on my nose.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening, sponsored by Shadows-on-the-Teche, site of the National Trust for Historic Preservation and Historic Artist Homes and Studios program of the National Trust. We are really happy to offer this program as the National Trust celebrates its 75th year. I am Valerie Ballant, Director of Historic Artist Homes and Studios, which we refer to our acronym HAHS. And this program this evening is part of a series hosted by Shadows on Louisiana Art. And tonight's presentation is made possible with support from the Louisiana Endowment of Humanities and a generous gift from Paul and Deb Lindsay. And so please visit shadowsontheteche.org to learn more information or to make a donation in support of programs like this. This evening, we are going to hear from expert Tom Whitehead about the amazing Louisiana folk artist Clementine Hunter, who you see her on screen, as well as other folk artists. The place where Hunter worked and created, now known as Melrose-on-the-Teche in Natchitoches, Louisiana, is currently preserved as a historic site and is a longtime member and valued member of the HAHS network. I am grateful to Adam Foreman, Director of Shadows, that he has invited me here to introduce Mr. Whitehead, but he has also asked me to spend just a few moments explaining the HAHS program. My thanks also to Jade Bateau at Shadows for her assistance with tonight's event. Next slide. The HAHS program is a broad-based membership network of independent sites and museums. And what began as a small membership of 20 sites has grown to a consortium of 80 sites across 31 states, from Maine to Montana, collectively representing more than 300 artistic legacies spanning 4 centuries in our nation's art. More than 25 years later, HAHS remains the leading voice and mentoring arm for these types of spaces, which sit at the fulcrum of art museum and historic site. Each year, prospective candidates are invited to apply and are peer reviewed. And all member HAHS sites are the preserved former homes and working studios of historical, which in this instance means deceased, American visual artists, now professionally managed, open to the public, and educationally interpreted. And collectively, these sites welcome more than 2 million visitors annually to engage in place-based learning. And certainly, while some of this visitation represents art aficionados or devotees of a particular artist, most are actually more general cultural pilgrims and travel busts. Next slide. Something I love about the program is that we seek to represent the full breadth and depth of the places where art was created in this country. Painting and sculpture, of course, but also photography and decorative arts like ceramics or furniture and textiles, and of course, folk art. There are artists you likely know, but others that await your discovery. And so, for example, you may have heard of Grant Wood, whose space is preserved in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Even if you don't know him, you likely know his painting, which is one of the most appropriated images in the visual lexicon, American Gothic. Although perhaps less familiar is groundbreaking ceramicist Margaret Wildenhain, who came to the United States to escape anti-Semitism and founded her own art colony in Central California, known as Pond Farm. Next slide, please. In our work, HAHS is dedicated to supporting the membership through professional mentoring, regranting opportunities, workshops, and convenings. And we connect sites to one another, to visitors, and to experts around the world. And as a national thought leader in site-specific legacy, we continue to expand the dialogue to an ever-growing network that centers and reconsiders concepts of home and studio, like the artist-designed environment by the self-taught artist prophet Isaiah, which was accepted into HAHS earlier this year. Next slide. Increasingly, though, we are focused on raising public consciousness about these sites through outreach communications, digital storytelling, publications like our guidebook, exhibitions, and programming like this one. And this directly enables us to tell a fuller story of our nation's artistic heritage by amplifying sites such as the former home of groundbreaking video artist Nam June Pak and Shigeko Kubota. And this is our first site in the network of Asian American legacy. Next slide. But we are also actively guiding the efforts of those currently working to save sites under threat and fostering the next generation of these preserved artist sites. We serve as a key advisor to artists, descendants, and stakeholders who are working on site-based artistic legacy right now. This engagement often happens many years before sites come into HAHS and is done through prolonged and confidential and one-to-one pro bono mentorship. A recent example is the former home of L.V. Hull, who, like Clementine Hunter, was a self-taught folk artist living and working in the South. HAHS engaged with stakeholders over several years to first gain designation by the National Trust 11 Most Endangered list, and later to help secure an African American Cultural Action Fund grant. The site came into membership in March and will be open to the public next year. Next slide. The artists and place you will learn about tonight, as well as other paintings, but this particular site for me represents the very heart of what the HAHS network is really all about. The intersection of creative genius and compelling personal biography. A total immersive experience who venture to visit it. But at its core, Clementine Hunter's story and achievements speak to the universal desire that resides in all of us, every single one of us, to communicate our personal story and lived experience, and her sheer force of will to find her creative voice and put it forth is inspiring. I really hope that this is something that engages you in a way to want to discover all of these HAHS sites, because this is the promise that every site in the network has to offer. I have long known of Mr. Whitehead's significant contributions to Hunter's story through his writing and his images. HAHS and all who care about Clem, as she was often called, owe our thanks and a debt for his continued dedication to her life, her art, and her story. He was a member of Northwestern State University of Louisiana's faculty for 30 years, serving as an assessor of journalism and director of international programs. One of the leading experts on Clementine Hunter, Whitehead worked on documentaries and co-authored and edited books on Clementine Hunter, including Clementine Hunter, Her Life and Art. And just before we got on, I got a little taste of what's to come, and we are all in for a super duper treat. So it is my pleasure to introduce Tom Whitehead. Tom, please take it away.
Thank you. It's good to tell this story. It's a story that I think needs telling because the people that did the work originally, Clementine Hunter, they didn't have a way to tell that story. And these paintings they did tell a story. And I think it's sort of our obligation now to keep that story going, not let it die or be forgotten about.
So I think it'd be great if you just start telling the stories that you want to tell, Tom, and start bringing up these wonderful paintings that Adam and I had the pleasure of seeing earlier tonight.
I came to school at Northwestern State University in 1964. I was a student worker in the English department, and I helped. The teacher was doing a program to where she did some video work, but she used sentence strips. There was no digital graphics. and she'd write the verb or whatever the word is on a piece of paper. My job was to put it in the right spot in front of the camera to look at the word. Well, I did that, and one afternoon, Oral Williams said, "Would you like to ride out to Melrose and meet Clementine Hunter?" And I said, "Sure, I'll go." And I went out there, and that's the afternoon that I bought my very first painting for $3 from Clementine Hunter. That's what she sold it for. I had cash in my pocket, and she said, $3. So I did. And by the way, there was a major forgery case of her work, and this painting was used as documentation by the FBI because they convicted, sent 3 people to jail. And that's one of the first times they had done folk art fake. But Clementine's story is something I think is really important because that has disappeared. They all used tractors, and mechanization came to agriculture, and that caused all this connection in the community has changed a great deal. Down Cane River, there's a unique population of Creole people, and the communications is through the church, but it's also through their storytelling. And the storytelling, I think, is what Clementine Dunner is preserving forever, the paintings and the stories of working on the plantation in the South. The opportunity to tell these stories is because they're inside views. I couldn't imagine anything worse than picking cotton. She said it was the favorite time of her life because people would sing going up and down the rows, and it was a very communal thing, experience. And she started when she was in the 1920s, I think, picking cotton. Was a very young child, and to her, the day she died, she was still said that was her favorite time of her life, going down the field, singing and talking among the people picking the cotton. And Clementine Hunter's stories are rare because they protect an insider's perspective of what it was like. Not many people that picked cotton or did all the wash days had the opportunity to write. They had no cameras, they had no writing skills. So Clementine's paintings give that insider's perspective to what life was like on a southern plantation, really in the first half of the last century. So, I'll continue talking. Yes. Just recently, there was I'm very pleased with this story. There was a forgery case, and the FBI prosecuted, sent 3 people to jail for folk art forgery. It was the first time the national headquarters of FBI had taken on folk art forgery. And I still today look around and think, oh gosh, this is my favorite Clementine. And then I say, well, maybe this is my favorite Clementine. But I sometimes just come sit in this room in my gallery and just look. And I don't say anything or anything. I just look at the paintings and enjoy them. And I just might note here for people watching, the furniture in this room, the sofas, were owned by the New Orleans writer Lyle Saxon. He had a best-selling book in the 1920s called Children of Strangers. And he lived at Melrose when he was out in New Orleans. He was in New Orleans most of the time, but he came to Melrose. And this furniture came out of his apartment in New Orleans on Royal Street. So I have the Lyle Saxon's furniture, and what I call the Clematorium. And Clementine's stories they'll forever be told now through the paintings.
Mr. Whitehead, can you talk a little bit about what it was like the first time you went to meet her and to actually see the things that she had created at Melrose?
Yes. I was a student working in the English department, and the teacher there, they did sentence strips where they did verbs and stuff, and they didn't have digital stuff. So she had pencil stickers with verb or noun or whatever written on it. And my job was to listen to her and put the sticker up in the front of the camera for the TV shot. Well, when we started doing that, she took me to Clementine's that afternoon. It's the first time I ever met Clementine Hunter. And that's the day that I bought my very first painting, was this painting. I bought it from Clementine for $3. And by the way, I want to show you the back of it, front and back. This painting is special because there was a group of 3 people involved in a huge forgery case, and they copied Clementine's work. And the FBI, it was a huge prosecution. 3 people got convicted. The story here is that they did paint testing and they did everything. And this is what the FBI called a certified original. And it's definitely one of my first painting I got for $3. And it makes me think how special it is to be important in the integrity of art with the folk art, with the federal investigation and conviction of those people for forging art. I got another one. Let me show you another. Can I talk about this one briefly? Ouch. Clementine was a folk artist, and she painted scenes of Melrose Plantation, cotton picking and stuff. But every once in a while, I think this was her true genius. She would create a painting that she'd ever done before. She called this one Fruits and Vegetables of the Plantation. And she drew that she just did it. She painted it. Nobody's the only one she ever did. So I don't know, it's just her intelligence, the idea of her brilliance that happened on this. Here's that one, and I got one more. And I also want to mention another facet of Clementine. Let's see what this one is. Oh, I'm a member of Southern Fraternity Kappa Alpha Order, and the chapter got her to paint me the KA crest as a present. And the thing interesting is, on the original crest, it's got KA, and Clementine didn't know the alphabet. And when she painted it, she didn't know how to make a K. So it came out like a cross, but that makes it even more wonderful. But there's the KA crest owned by Clementine Hunter. Now, I also have here a couple of other scenes that I think are really important ones from Clementine Hunter. Oh, here we go. Clementine Hunter worked at Melrose. It was a huge plantation. It had been there for 100 years. And one of the things, every Monday was wash day at Melrose. And on Monday mornings, they'd wash the clothes and hang them on the line. And as Clementine said, the women were doing the work. Clementine was shaking, the guy was shaking the tree for pecans. But there's a Clementine Hunter. These are all real scenes. This happened. I mean, if you had a camera, it's the same thing as you can take a camera, they get a picture. It's with this. And I have a couple more here to show you. That's fishing on the Cane River. That was one of the most popular things out there. But also, they did pole fishing on the side of the river, on the side of the riverbank. Well, here is fishing on the pole fishing. They'd go over there, women and men and all together, and throw the hook and the post and the bait and the line in the Cane River, and they'd bring it out and show it. These are all from memory paintings. And there are very few people, think about this, that live this, that have the ability to document. They didn't have cameras, they didn't have paintings. And I have one more here of this kind of a trilogy. And this is the one about going fishing. Well, look at it right here. I think I got it. Either get me or one of the other. Here we go. Look at this one. This is going fishing. This is the horse, the mule, and they're the two ladies riding in the back of the wagon and the man. I want to notice something here. I'll make sure y'all notice this. It's very common. There's been a huge forgery case later on, but one thing Clementine did was always paint a penis on a horse, and the forger never figured it out. One of the giveaways, if you see a Clementine with a wagon or something, the horse mule doesn't have a penis, then you know it's a real one, because it's fake, because Clementine put the penis on every animal she painted, and there's one of those. The two ladies going fishing on the Cane River. And Cane River, by the way, just for a brief background, is a historic plantation that was founded by freed people of color. So it's rare in the South to find a plantation that was founded by black people, and they did. And it's a public site now. It's a national. It's not a trust policy, but it is a place that's open to the public. It's all kind of civic protections and recognition for its historic status. And there's been famous writers, Lyle Saxon, the New Orleans writer in the 1920s. He lived there and used it to write and work. And you just kind of surprised. I have a little quick story to tell. It just happened yesterday. A friend of mine from Boston came down, Larry Lucchino, and he wanted to see Clementine. And he bought 3 Clementines. Of course, I had to ship him back to Boston. Well, we got him to Boston, and Larry died recently, and they didn't know what to do with him. So they decided they would give him to a university. They didn't want to sell him. So they sent him to Vassar, and Vassar is excited to see the 3 Clementine Hunter paintings. I've had a thank you note from Vassar telling him to give the paintings to them. So, the story continues, but the story of Clementines is a story of an insider. Most people couldn't read, write, paint, get cameras or anything, and Clementine told that perspective. And the paintings are just unique in terms of, life. Let me show you one more painting. And this is a really good one to tell you about. can't get to it. I'll show you these. Here's two more. This one is not a painting, it's a picture, a photograph. Look at this one. I was at Clementine's one day and a photographer was out there and said, I took her picture. He said, let me take a picture of you and Clementine. And there it is. There's Clementine and me. That's one of my prized possessions is the Clementine Hunter painting with me. She lived in a house trailer. She left Melrose. She didn't like living in the house. It was cold and all this. So she bought a house trailer. In the last 20 years of her life, she lived in a house trailer, a unit of manufactured housing, as they say. And Clementine loved living in that trailer. And you'd go to her, she had the living room, was kind of where she painted and had stuff to see and sell. But it was always so hot in there. She had a hot-bellied stove in there. And it could be June, maybe June. There'd be the fire going in that pot, keeping her warm. And you'd have to wear your summer clothes. Even in wintertime, you had to be where you could dress down because otherwise you'd get too hot in the house. I don't know how many people know spider lilies. They pop up, and they're a southern phenomenon, I guess. They just pop up in the yard. They're like pinwheels, and they just come up. You don't have to do anything to them, which is great. And they come out, and Clementine painted a group of them. There's her signature. Her signature varied over the years. Now, I'm not quite that good, but you can generally look at her signature and tell you when it was done. The first paintings were not signed at all, and they told her she needed to sign her name. So they taught her to make CH. And the lady who owned Melrose Plantation.
Can I interrupt for just 1 minute?
Yeah.
Can you lift the paintings higher?
Yes. Like that? Not that high enough? Or?
Yeah, that's better. We just want to see the whole thing.
That's spider lilies. And that's spider. Okay, I'll do some more of those, pick up a couple more and show you some that are. But she did a great job on those. That's hard to paint those spirals on the thing. And I was telling you about the signature. When she first started painting paintings, no signature. They told her she needed to sign the pictures because somebody knew who painted it. So they taught her to make a correct CH. Then she decided along the way that Cammie Henry, who owned the plantation, signed documents and papers and things with a correct CH. And Clementine did not tell me. She did not want anyone getting confused with Cammie Henry's stuff in her work. So she reversed the C on all her paintings. And I can also look at the painting, the signature, and tell you within some approximation when it was done, the signature evolved over time. By the time she passed away, the C was completely inside the H. The H was completely inside the C. Okay. Oops, that way. Let me show. Oh, this is a special one. Let me show you this. I may not be able to get it off the wall, but let me try that one more time. Well, it may come down. I may come down with it. This is an example of Clementine back there. They had back in the country back then. They had 8 party lines, and you pick up the phone, you use it, and somebody was talking. You'd hear them talk, or they could listen to what you were saying when you were talking. Well, Clementine got all in a dither about that. So back then you can't like you do today when you just go plug a computer and do things. She decided that she needed to have a private. She wanted to talk on the phone where she could use the phone when she could talk on it. So she got her a private line. It took some politics on that one. And what they did was they had to come out there and run new lines across and it was a cold winter day. Oh, I'll get where it's in better focus. Yeah, here we go. Here's the blinds they're working on up here. And it was a cold winter day, and they built a fire right there. And that fire was where they warmed up to keep warm. And that brown stripe across there is the road, the highway. And the bottom of it, you can see the men climbing up the poles, running the wire. And there's Clementine in the orange dress in the lower corner to where she's watching it all take place. So these stories are not only, paintings of flowers and stuff, they're a narrative. And I think about it this way, is that people that lived out there didn't have a way they couldn't read nor write. And Clementine's documentation of that insider's perspective by painting pictures is very important. I was involved recently this week with Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Somebody in Boston bought 3 Clementines and they died. and they wanted to know what the family wanted to know what to do with him. And I said, give him to Vassar. And Vassar was so excited to get 3 Clementine Hunter paintings. I think they want more. That was a hint when they were talking back to me. But it's good to see the story being preserved. Oh, let me show you one more here. Oops. I'll never get all these back. Oh. One of the big events in the community was funerals. And this is Clementine Hunter painting. I may be able to hold this funeral. And I just expect the women in the church all wear uniforms. They don't want anybody to look better than another one. So they all had the standard uniforms they wore for church services as well as funerals. And Clementine's painting this one. This is a funeral, and you can see the casket. I can't hold this and get to the casket. But here's the grave right here. Grave's being dug. Where is the grave? Here it is, right there. There's the grave. The brown grave is being dug, and there are the people coming out of the church. And I guess she documents something I don't think happens anymore. That's one of her, I think, treasures, was that the women of the church all wore the same clothes. They didn't want anybody to outdress or anything else, anyone else. So the women would wear church uniforms. And I think there was some altar guilds or society or something involved in it. But those are stories that the Clementine Hunter documented stories that nobody wrote about. And we know we're knowing about talking about them today because of what the paintings. But these stories, that part of Southern life has completely changed. There's still an emphasis on the church. They do go to the very popular church down there. Of course, Clementine went to her funeral, went to the Catholic Church, but she went to a Baptist church, but they ended up having a Catholic funeral because she liked to sing and serve in the church that the Baptist church they didn't have at the Catholic Church. So there's just, there's storytelling. And I think these have mostly been documented. But the idea that Clementine's her paintings are more than paintings. They're storytelling, they're documentation. And I think that's one of the great legacies of Clementine, besides her actual paintings, is the stories they tell that will survive forever, I hope.
Mr. Whitehead, I don't know if Adam had already asked you this because I had a little Zoom issue and then had to exit and come back in. You were surrounded by paintings, which I love. You were actually showing what it means to live with artwork in your own home. How many Clementine Hunter paintings do you own?
Probably about 75.
And you own other works, like some of her textile works or mugs or other things?
She did quilts. I don't know where the quilt is, but yeah, she made quilts. She actually didn't quilt the quilts usually. She made the patterns. She sewed together the designs or the things. I gotta think where it is. Maybe let me see if it's here. Hold on, let me look and see if the quilt's here. Oh. In later years, she got to where she couldn't have lean over the boards to paint and stuff. She liked to hold things in her lap. And these are bottles. She would drink cheap wine, and she called it cough medicine. Clementine, you need any pain or anything? I need a little cough medicine. And you take some bottle of wine out there, and it was cheap wine. She didn't like good one. She couldn't open a bottle with a cork in it. So you had to go buy cheap wine to take it to her. She couldn't screw the top and open it that way. These are one of my, and you have to be very careful with these because I've had some of these clean, but you had to clean it with toothpicks and all of these things so you don't dare mess the paint up. Let me put this out of the way. There we go. Let's see what else we have. Have you doing a well?
Mr. Whitehead, Mr. Whitehead, we have a question.
And lift them a little bit higher.
Okay, what, the bottles?
Yeah, but also we have a question from a guest. When did Clementine's paintings become valuable, and for how many years did she paint? A long time, did she not?
That's a correct answer. We do not necessarily know the day. There wasn't an alpha day when she began painting. What happened at Melrose got her to painting was this. Cammy Henry, that owned the plantation, it was a big southern plantation. it was a very trendy thing in New Orleans for artists in New Orleans. There was a train that went from New Orleans to Natchitoches or Shreveport or somewhere, and they would stop at Melrose. And artists, Lyle Saxon, the writer, and painters would all, Alberta Kinsey, they would all ride the train and get off at Melrose, and they had this grand event with Cammy drinking and all kind of things. And that's when Clementine saved the wine bottles and would paint wine bottles. These are very difficult to conservation issues because they don't. You try to clean it. If I had this one cleaned by with a swab deal, because you couldn't let the paint cleaner get on the flowers, so you had to be very. I didn't do it. They did. Things are falling. Not sure how I'm ever get all this back together. And I also have other objects. Toward the end of her life, she liked to paint small things she could hold in her lap. She didn't like to hold big things. She couldn't hold him. She propped him up. I tell you, these are good storytellers. Clementine Hunter dipped snuff. I don't approve of that. But she then would clean the snuff bottles and paint them. And these are some, this is a, let me get, wait a minute, let me sit down so I won't fall down and look at the camera, put it close to the camera. Here we go. I'm going to have to hold him real careful. There's a glare. This is pink and white, red. Let me try this one. I think it might work better.
That's great. And she painted, I think I heard you say, like, she painted every day, right? She was constantly painting.
Yeah, she'd tell you, I'm going to quit painting. I'm tired of painting. And you got the next day, she's painting. So, and she was very religious, but she didn't go to church. What happened was, this is kind of a funny side story. Some preacher down there down Cane River, I don't know who it was, a priest or who he was, I don't know. But he tape recorded on these great big old tape recorders, service every Sunday. And he'd bring it to Clementine's house and play it for her. And she said, finally one day she said, what do I do to get him to quit doing this? She didn't like the idea of somebody coming and playing a church service an hour or so with that she, wasn't there. So, but, there are just so many wonderful stories about Clementine that was a real person. She was bright. I just wondered sometimes if she had had education, what could she have done? I just don't know. You have to think her brilliance. I don't think it would continue there, but she was very sharp. She could make jokes. She could be fun. And her paintings, we're not doing what we're doing here tonight, but you could put together by historical life of what plantation was like down the Cane River with the plantations because of the way they lived. And that's how they lived all their life. They had wash days. They had, she also, there's some, I don't know where they are. I don't have one here right close right now. They did hog killings, and that was always a big deal in the wintertime. They would make sausage. They would make pork chops. I don't know what, and they would make something with the hoofs of the pig. I don't know what that was. But Clementine loved pork, and the doctor told her you weren't supposed to eat pork. And of course, she just ignored it. She called it chicken or something else and continued to eat it. But she was one of the most amazing people I ever been around in my life. She was witty. She was bright. I often, as I said earlier, wonder what would have happened if she'd had education. She could have been a powerhouse, I believe.
Along that lines, can you talk about the time that Northwestern State displayed her work for the first time while she was still living, and what that, a very particular thing about that exhibition, which I think you can tell the story of that exhibition and sort of relate it to whether she was able to go see it or not.
Well, when they decided, this was earlier on, this was not like in the 70s or 60s, it was probably in the 50s. They had Northwestern had an art gallery in the library, and they had a display of Clementine's work, and Black people were forbidden from going to the library. So they had to wait over there one day until the building closed, the day ended, unlocked the building, and unlocked it. Somebody took Clementine in to see her paintings in the library. And what they told me, I was not around by then. I was much too early for me. They would say that Clementine, she'd look at it and she'd be surprised at her painting, what it looked like. she was always sort of surprised what her painting looked like, but I thought it was kind of interesting. She was very, she was surprised. She'd like to see her paintings exhibited, but she had never particularly thought of them in an exhibit mode. So, it's just, she was a brilliant, I think if she'd had education, she could have been a brilliant person, but, accomplish a lot, I mean, because she was so sharp, innately sharp. And there's so many memories I have. And I'll show you another couple things. Hold on, let me wander over here.
I think it's important for our audience members to know that Clementine Hunter actually did not start painting until pretty late in her life, when she was already a grandmother. So she had decades to paint, and a huge output. She has a mammoth output. What we see in Mr. Whitehouse home is only part of it. But this is not a person who started painting and producing as a teenager or in her 20s. She was a mature woman who began this practice, which I always find very, very inspirational. Am I remembering that correctly, Tom, that she started later in life?
Exactly. The only little note I'd add is toward the end of her life, she liked small things she could hold in her hand, not bend over an easel or something. This is a milk bottle, plastic milk bottle, and she painted it. Now, of course, conservation of paint on plastic is not easy, but I try to take care of this one. But there's figures she drew around the bow boat and stuff. And I brought another one too. Clementine drank a little wine. She didn't call it wine. She called it cough medicine. She would tell us, Clementine, anything? Well, I could use some cough medicine. I'm running low. And you go out and buy a couple of bottles. And this is the amazing thing. This is funny. She couldn't drink expensive wine because she couldn't get the cork open. She always wanted wine bottles that had screw tops because she could open the screw and drink the wine, but she couldn't get a cork out of the bottle. So these are wine bottles. And then she'd wash the bottles, and then she'd paint them. These are zinnias on it.
So I have a question, and then I wanted to share a question from the guests. So I'll start with my question because we're talking about these items that she's painting on. She had to really, my understanding is she had to really make her materials last also because of the cost of those paints themselves. And so what kind of sort of paints did she use and where did she get them? And did she sort of try to thin them out to make them last longer, or did she have a good availability of paint, throughout her time when she was painting?
She hated acrylics. She liked oil paint for this reason. She could start painting something and quit, and she'd leave the brush in a bottle somewhere wrapped up, and she'd come back the next day and paint some more. She did not like acrylics at all because they'd dry too quickly on her. If she'd say, don't bring me any of that funny paint, she'd say something like that. She couldn't read the label to tell it was acrylic or not acrylic. So we had to be very careful and watch what people took out there to make sure they were oil paints.
And we have a question from the guest. I mean, Clementine, I believe she did live along enough to start to see her style of art and her own work become popular. What did she think about that?
She enjoyed people coming to see her, but our U.S. Senator Bennett Johnston at that time, his wife was a neighbor of Melrose Plantation. She lived on a plantation down the road, and she went to Clementine and said, Clementine, we will buy you a ticket or charter you a plane and take you to Washington to get your certificate from the Congress. She said, if they want to come see me, they come here. Then I'm not going there. So that was the end of her traveling anywhere. She would come to Natchitoches occasionally for something. The Chamber of Commerce honored her, and she did come to that. And it was kind of an interesting experience. We're talking to Clementine about what she'd eat and stuff, dinner and stuff. She said, fried chicken. And to her knowledge or ability, her realm of experiences, she always thought fried chicken. She didn't want steak. She didn't want caviar. She didn't want anything. She wanted fried chicken. And whenever we'd go out there, we'd stop at Colonel Sanders and buy fried chicken and take a tour out there. She loved that Colonel Sanders fried chicken.
But she herself also worked as a cook. right, in the main house and was a good cook. And certain recipes of hers were written down and are part of a cookbook that was published on Melrose. Am I remembering that right?
You're correct on all points. Francois Mignon, the blind, he came to Melrose in the 1920s or 30s with Lyle Saxon. He was going blind. He claimed to be from France, but he was from African Court in New York. And he was going blind and nobody take care of him. So Lyle Saxon knew and met him in New Orleans somewhere and brought him to Melrose, and he stayed there the rest of his life. And when they sold Melrose, a wonderful family here in Natchitoches, the Williamses, they took it upon themselves. They had a live-in servant in a house. They had to get her out and pay her to move somewhere else to put Francois in there because he couldn't cook or anything. So every morning the cook would take him breakfast, or he'd come over to the house for breakfast. And he was well taken care of, but he was such a unique person. But I enjoy knowing Francois. Francois stories are generous, and you always have to take a Francois story with a little degree of concern because he did have some ease with the truth. He would take a story and embellish it very good. He was very good at that.
And so when we think about her time at Melrose, I mean, you're showing us some singular paintings, but the thing that I think about is the amazing murals that she created on the plantation. Can you talk a little bit about those, Mr. Whitehead?
Yes. Francois Mignon, the blind man out there, who was an art critic, claimed to be an art critic, but he was blind, mostly blind. They came up with the idea, and one of the historic buildings at Melrose is the African House. And it's a two-story, it was built like a style of African architecture. Now, who designed that thing, nobody's real sure. But on the first floor was wood and stuff. You could store like corn and things. But the second floor was very important. You'd store cotton bales up there because nobody could get to them to steal them. Now, they had a place, the second floor, there was a spiral staircase that went up the second floor. And that house is still in Melrose. It's a historic landmark on the landmark status, the African House at Melrose. And Clementine painted the murals of plantation life. They are truly a genius. If anybody wanted to see a genius in folk art, it's the African House murals that Clementine painted.
And that's a cycle of multiple murals, right? That just sort of cover the whole upstairs.
Yes.
That show various scenes about life and doings on the plantation. Is that right?
Exactly. And we were very fortunate about 15 or 20 years ago. They had been exposed, and there's no commodity, there was no climate control. There was no control of moisture, and they were in danger. And we had a philanthropist in Minneapolis put up to $25,000, $15,000 or $20,000 it took to take them down. They spent 3 or 4 months in Houston for conservation work, and they had returned him there. And now they do have some air filters and stuff in there to keep moisture out. That was what starting the African House murals.
And so when you stand up there on the second floor, basically you're surrounded in its entirety by her, right? And her stories and paint. Do you have a favorite one?
I don't know, and I'm probably not the correct one to have. I love the cotton picking. I love the cotton picking ones because there's the fields of people, these ladies, and some of them are colorfully dressed, and they pull in the sack behind them where they put the cotton when they pick it. And what the story that everybody tells, including them, it's not just a Francois story, was they would sing all day, going up and down the road. It was chants and some gospels and spirituals. And it was a major period with the African House murals, was the fact that they documented life on the plantation. And the music and the stories that go with it are really that's one reason why it's a national landmark, I think, is the idea that it is a storyteller that no one else seems to have one like.
And so when we talk, you mentioned her a little bit earlier. So Cammie Henry was one of these sort of multi-generational moments at Melrose, and she developed this artist colony. I mean, I think today so many people really associate the site with Clementine, but can you talk a little bit about the influence that Cammie Henry as a woman had on developing this entire artist colony, which according to some records that I looked at, there was over 100 artists coming through there over time. So can you talk a little bit about her work and her influence?
Yes. First of all, let me set a geographical example. There was a train service from New Orleans to Shreveport or somewhere, but it went stopped at Melrose. There was a Melrose stop. And artists in New Orleans would ride the train up there and get off and visit with Cammie. They might stay a month. She didn't care. It was like a writer's colony, artist colony. She'd have lunch certain time and dinner a certain time. And they had some rules about drinking alcohol. A little problem with that. Some of them, I think, had a little problem. And Cammie was the one that kind of got the idea of somewhat of a version of an artist colony. She wanted to preserve, she knew what was happening in society. And she thought it was very important that they document what was going on out there. And she started that movement to preserve things. That was one of her great contribution is the African House Murals.
And when you go to Melrose today, you can see some efforts like around, yes, around writers and painters, but around traditional Cane River artistic pursuits. Like there's a isn't there a bindery still on property there? So it wasn't just about painting and some of the more traditional craft that we think about. It was bigger than that. What is that right?
Yes, Cammie had a bindery, she called it. And it was a place where they could bind documents, books. And it wasn't mass production, of course. But if she had somebody wanting to write a short story book or something, there probably wasn't a great deal of demand for that. That Cammie they would bind it. The bindery, they'd go in there and cut and sew it and tie it together. The bindery's still out there. I don't think they don't bind anything anymore, but the bindery's still there.
And so I think about how she wanted people to come see her, and I have seen images where she actually had signage that says 50, I can't remember the amount, but how much, I think she understood that her work could be bought. Is that correct? I mean, she wasn't just giving it away.
That sign, 50 cents to look, that was put up there in modern times.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead.
That was a completely new modern thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it was not a part of Cammie's operation.
So did she give most of her works away? Who was receiving her works as she was making them?
She gave away some of it, but they were selling the paintings. Clementine lived in a little house across the road for a long time, across the road. And I bought my first painting for over $5. But that's what she wanted. I paid, and I think the most I ever paid for her was $200. But what I paid, whatever she wanted, I paid, and never quibbled about that at all.
And so today, these works, of course, are being sought after by institutions all over the country.
Yes. I'll tell you another. This is a sidebar. We're doing sidebars now. I don't know if you know, in New York, Bob Wilson, he's famous for doing Einstein on the Beach, the first modern opera. Well, somehow or another, he was from Baton Rouge, New Orleans. His aunt, he was a kid, his aunt brought him to Melrose, and he met Francois. And that's his story. He's been in my house, and he talks about it. He says, that's the first time I'd ever seen art. We didn't have art down there. This is art. And that's where he got the whole thing. And he did an opera on Clementine called Zinnias. I was there on opening night. It was interesting. And he also has, if you're familiar with his work, he has the Watermill Center out on Long Island. It's a creative thing. I'm not sure what they do, but it's creative. But Bob Wilson is still a big fan of Clementine Hunter's. Well, he came here. We had a dinner party for him in my house and all kind of things. And but it was Bob was a very special person. Yes.
And I would say, so I have been to Watermill, and I have actually.
Yes, at Watermill. And what he did, you might be interested in hearing this if you weren't there the summer that I was there. He built out there in the pasture, backyard, or whatever's around the back of it, a model of the African house, somewhat of a model of it. And he had artists repaint the murals and put the murals in. He rehung the murals, his fake murals, in the African house he built out there. Well, I went out there that one summer and did all that stuff. It was, shall we say, fascinating.
Yes, we should. And I will say, for those of you that are interested in the opera that Bob created, that was inspired by Clementine and her life, you can actually very easily find video snippets of that piece. There, of course, you're talking about how you only paid $3 for that first painting, Mr. Whitehead. So there are people in the audience who want to know how much that painting is worth today. How much is that worth today?
Well, it's probably worth $200 or $300. So small, that mine's a small one, but they're big prices in New Orleans. At Neil auction, they bring $500 easily. And then there's some galleries in New Orleans that sell the paintings. Are very good, but they sell quality stuff, really quality things.
And when you talk about, we see you surrounded by your art. Do you have plans for what will happen to your collection longer term?
I haven't signed the papers yet, but I definitely want it to go into a public, where it's a public accessible.
And so you want the public to start to enjoy them.
When I'm gone, somebody else can enjoy them.
That's wonderful. And I think one of the other questions, I'm thinking about is, can you talk a little bit more, if you are able, about sort of the value of folk art? Like, I think it's been going up, and there's a recognition more of sites and artists who are doing this work, but has that been your experience in terms of like recognition of other arts from, let's say, this region of Louisiana? I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
There's been a little drift into it. There is, I can't think of her name right now, a lady out in the country that has painted some, but she never got the marketing Clementine did. Clementine was in the right place at the right time. And, but Bob Wilson has been here a couple of times, fiddling around. And Melrose is kind of locked in a time vacuum. I don't know if y'all have been out there or not, but everything is more or less like it was. The African House Murals are there. The Clementine house we paid to have that restored, and for the house she painted in, it moved it over there. We got permission from the National Trust to move it to a historic site because it was going to be demolished if they didn't move it, and they let us move it across the road.
And is it true that her palette and her brushes are still on display there? Because that to me is such a sort of a piece of the sort of the alchemy of like understanding that people made things, that she lived and worked and made things. So can people see these materials when they go to Melrose?
Yes, and there's a recognition of Clementine done a lot in Melrose. Clementine stories are told, and if you haven't seen it, and I mentioned it earlier, y'all need to watch the video of Bob Wilson's Xenia's Life of Clementine Hunter. That's very good. It's an opera he did.
And so is there any sort of other personal story? We're coming up on the last few minutes here. I would invite anyone else to put comments in the chat. I would ask Mr. Whitehead, I would ask two things. Is there a favorite story that you have of her that you haven't told? And is there a painting on one of these walls that you are dying to show us and talk about that we have not seen yet?
Probably not, because the one I brought in here, my favorite was the zinnias because I watched her paint it. I went out there one afternoon. She was sitting in the yard in a folding chair painting this thing, and I just sat there and watched her. Here, I'll put it a bit closer.
How long did that take, Mr. Whitehead?
Probably an hour and a half. She could, I don't want to say whip them out, but she could. And there's a lot of that. If you're a cultural historian, one of the things she paints in there in her paintings are the honky-tonks. And those were two honky-tonks there, Bubba's, and there was one across the river, the Friendly Place. And they're documented in her paintings. They've long been torn down and messed around. And but they're documented in her painting. That's part of the history of Cane River, is honky-tonks. So her paintings are more than just paintings; they're storytellers.
And that includes both the work and also the sort of other aspects of life at this time in this area. Is that fair to say when you're talking about the honky-tonk aspect? She also did some weddings, did she not?
Oh yes,
I'm sure you have one.
I have a one.
It may not be at hand, but I'm sure you had one. and they're wonderful documentation of what weddings were like, right? I mean, they're really accurate. They're not just storytelling, they're also accurate storytelling. Is that fair to say?
Yes. One, I'm going to pull something out here, which I'll never get back into.
Okay, be quick.
I'll be quick. Yeah, here, I'm getting it off. Did I mention this, the cotton picking one? I don't think I pulled this out yet.
I mean, I love this. This is like what it means to live with art. And I would encourage everyone to explore this, maybe whether Clementine Hunter is your thing or not. Can you push it up a little higher?
I am. This is cotton picking, and look, notice here, there's something you probably have to carefully see. You see that little white thing in the middle? That's the goose. And before they had all these pesticides, they kept geese in the field. They fenced them in the fields where the geese couldn't get out. And geese eat grass. I didn't know that, but they eat grass. And this is the geese. This is a cultural picture as well as historic. Here are the people picking cotton, and there are the animals picking up the trash. So, see the.
Yeah, I think that's amazing because it's also a historical document. It's her story. It's a cultural story, and it's also a historical document, which is really kind of extraordinary, I think. I'm curious, she had a very unique style. For those of us who know Clementine Hunter, her style is often very recognizable. Are there other artists who have copied her style, family members or other people who may have copied her style?
Forgers.
Okay. What about her grandson?
Did I tell you three people got convicted for forging her work? That was the first time the FBI had ever prosecuted a folk art forgery case.
Is anyone in her, like any of her descendants, were they artistically inclined? What about her grandson, James Hunter?
Well, what he does, and I'm critical on this, I wish in a way he would do differently. He paints her pictures and not his stories.
I see. He's not painting his own story. He's sort of continuing her stories, and you would like him to explore what makes her so authentic is that these were her stories in her time. And I think someone has asked, and this might be a good way to sort of bookend this talk, what year do we believe that she was born? And what year did she die, if you know? I'm looking this up quickly in my own
I don't have it guidebook. I don't have my biography with me here, but I can send it to you.
So I think I want to say, and I'm just looking really quickly, I feel, so the data I have for audience members, because she is included in the HAHS guidebook, and this is not a shameless plug, I'm just looking it up to see what we have here. We have a circa date of 1887, and we have a death date of 1988. This woman lived a long, long time.
The birth date, I don't know the birth date because nobody kept records. They didn't have registers. They just got a baby, and that was it. No, and the other one, the Watermill Center, Bob Wilson did some stuff up there with it about Clementine.
And so I think that one of the things to understand about her is she was born in a very particular moment, and she was painting in a very particular moment, and she lived to also then into the 1980s, which is, of course, a time, this is tremendous change happening in our world, in her world. And so I think, you have in the breadth of the work, decades of the evolution of this artist and the continued production of this artist and the sheer passion she had for painting. In the end, it was something that it's part of who she was, Tom, right? Not just what she did. She had a compulsion to do it. She had to do it.
Yes. She would say, well, you go out there and get a painting. I'm quitting painting. I'm tired of painting. I'm not going to paint anymore. And then go out there 2 or 3 days later and it'd be a painting.
And so I want to, we're coming up on time, and I sort of want to thank everybody for attending, and thank you, Tom, for letting us in on your wonderful firsthand experiences. I think it's so important when someone has had their own personal touch with an artist and how that informs their thinking. And you are clearly a fan. Your entire backdrop behind you represents that. And I want to thank Adam for bringing us all together. Adam, is there anything last you would like to say on behalf of Shadows before we sign off?
He didn't say anything. So.
He said, well,
Yeah,
I'm going to thank, go ahead, Adam. I'm going to thank everyone once again for joining us for the celebration of Louisiana art, which is a series that Shadows is doing. And I'm thanking you for joining us in this partnership that Shadows had with HAHS. And just again, thank you to those supporters, the Louisiana Endowment of the Humanities, and the generous gift from Paul and Deb Lindsay. I urge you all to go see Shadows-on-the-Teche. I get to say that. I urge you all to learn more about Clementine Hunter and to also see her work at Melrose on the Cane.
I just have one little comment to make here. If any of you are in upstate New York and go out to Poughkeepsie, 3 Clementine Hunter paintings that I saw leave Clementine's house is donated to Vassar Art Gallery at Vassar last week.
So there are people actively acquiring, and so there are new places all the time to learn about her and see her work.
They were donated by the president of the Boston Red Sox. Came with me, a friend, and we found Clementine's, and he took him back up there. And when he died, they sent him over to Vassar.
So I thank you again, Tom, for sharing your stories. And thanks, everybody, for being part of this program today. Have a great evening.
Be safe. Take care.